Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today and taking some time out of your schedule to join us for the fourth Sustainability Expert Series events. I'm Janet Greco from Broadcast Projects, and I'm the executive producer of all the events that happen here on this platform. Before I turn over to Ben, who's going to tell you about the contents of this platform, I just wanted to mention two quick things. One is about the format of the session. One is the fact that the first hour will be a webinar. And if you'd like to ask questions, feel free to. You have a chat feature in the main screen to the right of the display that you have here now. But most of the questions will probably come full circle in the second hour, which is the opportunity for you to join the conversation with our experts today. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Janet. So before we talk about today's session, just a piece of news on my behalf. I've mentioned it a few times that I was working with a group of sponsors, including Orange, Soft at Home, Broad Peak, and Sagemcom, on a white paper on the sustainability of the homeland, and it's being released now. So I'll be hopefully I haven't spoken about it to my colleagues on the editorial board, including Janet, so to find out when we'll fit a special session dedicated to that. There's some exciting stuff like, I mean, it's kind of dull when you think about it, but we realized we actually measured that the home Wi-Fi, 90% of the energy consumption in the home Wi-Fi is complete wasted energy. It's idle time consumption. And so some exciting findings too about, how you go around deploying customer premise equipment in different countries depending on the energy mix, and so some original stuff. And I hope to bring that to you in the next few weeks, again, depending on my discussion with Janet and the other board members. So today is the fourth session we have of this year. We ran about 6 before in the last 2 years. And this year we started, just to remind you, because you have all of them nice and cleanly on the Broadcast Projects website, the SES, the Sustainability Experts Series webpage there. The first one was with Hemini and Eileen about the journey as a human journey you can have into sustainability when you're somebody in the media industry. Our second one was about the future of streaming, and hopefully we'll get back to that a bit today, with speakers from Broad Peak, ATEM, there was TNO, and the Broadband Forum. And last month we had a very fiery session with Jerry McGovern and Dom, who's back with us today, on waste, on digital waste. And so for those of you who've been following the news online, Dom isn't somebody who's had a sudden change sex from Annie, but Annie couldn't make it. She had a personal emergency. So we were told that we don't have quite enough women representing the industry. And so we were quite happy to have Annie, but she couldn't make it the last minute. So it really is not our fault. We're trying our best to be equal there, which brings me to the next couple of sessions coming up before the summer and into the summer. We want one typically about equal representation, the whole of the ESG story. So, we're very much on the E of the ESG, but there's also the S, society and how we manage as people. We have a session planned, I think next month, on open software with Romain Boucteau. We have a session planned with software optimization, and we have one with Accedo and perhaps a few other companies on energy consumption in the end devices, and a lot is still in preparation for the end of the year. So to kick off today, what are we going to talk about? The LESS Accord. As we have Dom in the room, I won't do an introduction to what the LESS Accord is. I'll let you start by giving the context, Dom, and we then have Kristen and Vincent who are going to respond to Dom's initial presentation of the LESS Accord. Kristen, from a measuring quality, what does it mean, perception of video quality, and what the good enough side of the story, and Vincent to bring us back down into the industry. We still are an industry with broadcast and streaming, and to see the whole picture and not get too focused on just one aspect of it. So Dom, if you want to take the floor away.
Big apologies, you've got my face again. We did really hope to have Annie representing the LESS Accord. I'm currently over in Denver at a conference representing the LESS Accord at Mile High Video. We thought we'd give you some variety from my boring old face and get Annie in, but unfortunately she's had personal reasons being called away. So sorry, I'm here again. So by sort of means of introduction, my name's Don Robinson. I've got about 30 years working with streaming and CDN in particular. And about 2-3 years ago, I founded an organisation called Greening of Streaming. Greening of Streaming is a members association focused principally on reducing operational energy of streaming. We have a heavy focus, or because of the emergence of greening of streaming from the CDN industry, we have a heavy focus on transmission, but we have a lot of actors who are focused on encoding, decoding, and physical chips and appliances that relate to the streaming industry. There's 1 or 2 broadcasters in there, and you'll see a number of trade associations as well, which are affiliating with us. So we're really working hard to promote thinking about sustainability through the streaming supply chain and ecosystem. Let's just recap on the problem space. Ben and I will go to hammer and tongs at each other about the exact balances on all of these statistics. I'm usually fairly terse with the use of any statistics because there aren't many which are particularly consistent, I think is the right word. The figures I tend to use are the IEAs because they are one of the most sort of conservative and quite often one of the most evidenced views of energy. So the figures to be mindful of: IEA figures, 1% of global final electricity supply is used by data centers, 1.5% of global final electricity supply is used by telecoms, 6% is used by ICT as a whole. And if you look at the box on the top right, that seems to be a consistent set of figures that the UK Parliament, for example, is working with. With about 70 to 80% of network traffic now being estimated to be video, you can sort of work to a number of around 2 to 3% of global final electricity supply is being used by streaming. I actually don't think the final detail of the amount matters. The important thing is it's a large enough order of magnitude that as an industry, we should be focused on introducing energy efficiency to our thinking. As an industry, as we evolved, we were struggling for many years to get any acceptance and adoption as a sort of baby brother of the broadcast industry. We were certainly not thinking about energy supply. That was something that came in the hosting and the telecoms billing and was just invisible to us as essentially software architects using telco and data center architecture. In the last 3 years, we've become the tail that wags the dog. We are now the dominant form of content consumption, especially when you go away from M&E. Everyone just thinks of, well, Netflix. Well, yeah, streaming is also TikTok and YouTube and video conferencing and this tool and so much more. So there's just an enormous amount of energy. We are kind of retrofitting our understanding of how much energy we use to the industry. And I think some of the conversation later today will be more about how we're going about trying to do measurement and so on. So greening of streaming, just very quickly, a handful of kind of key principles behind the organisation. So not for profit, we're a user group, not an SDO. We're focused on driving real change through education and engineering. I've mentioned that we're focused on operational energy. We constantly make people think systemically. We found many people in our sector were thinking in isolated atomic senses about their own contribution to the supply chain, which would often mean that they would make savings without realizing that they had unintended consequences and past considerable energy increases off down the supply chain. So encoding vendors simplifying their encoding works for their encoder sales, but at the other end of the chain, when you've got 30 million people who are now working 5% harder to decode video because of that encoding change, then you might be putting megawatts onto the grid. So we have to think systemically. We have a real internal philosophy: you can't win sustainability. So we're not about badging and accreditation. We are about working together to actually really reduce the energy demanded by the industry. I skipped one out there just to leave to last here. We have a cardinal rule: no greenwashing, which was tongue-in-cheek when we formed the organisation, but has become the heart and soul. And we, through peer review, through some fairly fierce industry competitors, we are changing how the industry is thinking about itself and marketing itself, and really focusing everyone on collaboration. We're looking at a variety of things, from language, promoting awareness, best practice, actual energy measurement, specifics on audio. We have a group which is focused on compression and decompression, which is one of the most variable and dynamic areas of energy consumption. And a couple of other working groups looking at liaison with academics and promoting energy into as a sort of KPI for SDOs to design against, standards organisations to design against. And then that leads us to the meat that we've come to talk about today, which is the lesser chord. So the lesser chord is an overarching narrative which has emerged from our working group 6, which is the compression decompression working group. Conversations at IBC last year around green buttons and eco mode. You know, we're clearly of the mind that you ship a TV in eco mode to get around your certification, and the customer turns it off as soon as they got it and puts it all on full brightness and full power. Green buttons, equally, nobody buys a 4K TV and presses a green button and cripples the quality. So the consumer doesn't want to opt into these things, but they're very happy for the industry to drive those decisions for them. So any attempt to say free market, just let the consumer do it, doesn't really pan out with any sustainability gains. The consumer, by and large, would be favourable for things to be more sustainable, but at the end of the day, they just want to watch TV. So this is this sustainability activity is something that the industry needs to take responsibility for and to drive. So we turn the argument on its head, and I like to preface the lesser chord with the gold button idea. We are the internet. We can, for example, determine that everyone who's watching a streaming platform can have only, by their default sort of mode, can have only the most energy efficient service. That doesn't mean we can't offer them a gold button if they want to. You know, let's suppose it turns out that 8K UHD is not the most energy efficient way to deliver content, so we default to something like 2K. And I'll go a little bit more into where that may lie in a second. But if we decide as an industry that we're going to default everyone to a 2K service, and only people who lean forward and press a gold button can jump up to their 8K service, that's the great thing about the internet. We can do that, but there's no point in defaulting everyone to 8K when maybe half the TVs that are on at the moment are just in the background, keeping someone company, entertaining the kids in the kitchen, display signage down elevators in the city, whatever it may be. Streaming, by and large, has tried to default to the highest quality. The only thing until recently that's tempered that has been cost. So quality is very much the sale of the industry. And we buy into this concept of quality. We buy 8K TVs, even if you need a VMAF analysis tool or a PSNR analysis tool to tell you if you're getting 8K. You can't tell it with your eyes very often. So we want to challenge the status quo that selling 8K, selling more gigabit, selling more Gs on your mobile phone is the right way forward. We are overselling. We are way past the point that the mean of the consumer needs. And we might need to check how much energy that's using and think about that on the whole. So the question we want to ask the industry is, what if the default streaming encoding profile was energy optimized with acceptable quality for general viewing, rather than, as it is today, typically quality optimized and over provisioned with no energy consideration? So it's quite a tough question for an industry that has been born chasing bigger numbers, bigger pixel resolutions, bigger bit rates, etc. The question is, have we passed that tipping point where we're good enough? And if so, can we actually stop the default growth and focus on energy optimization? Can we motivate the industry to do that? So we want to ask the industry, and the engineers industry in particular, what would a low energy sustainable streaming model look like? We call it the lesser chord. We're not trying to create a standard. We are just trying to make sure that the industry moves in the same direction together. Lots of sustainability activities have been treated as a competitive thing and have sent everyone off in many different directions. What we want to do is try and create a common accord, a common narrative, and we want to preface that with it being all about low energy sustainable streaming. A little tag at the bottom there, which I think is very important. Yes, codecs are very central. Codecs in isolations, you know, MPEG's worked on, as Chris from Apple pointed out to me last week, MPEG's worked on sustainability for many years, but it's all well and good to include the sustainable energy efficient option. If it's not deployed, then it's ineffective. So it is a good phrase to remember that it's not the codec, it's the codec implementation. That word implementation embraces the whole industry in my mind. As part of that sort of reach out to the industry, we're asking you all to tell us, if we implemented this globally, would it actually make a difference to the energy demands? Are there things that we can do that reduce energy? And there's a lot of dispute in the industry about what those are, those strategies might be. So we are really very much inviting the industry to throw their wildest ideas, their gut intuition at us. We also have to consider how viable some of these models might be. Obviously turning everything off is probably the most sustainable solution, but it's not really going to keep us it's not going to keep our industry fed, and it's not going to keep people informed and entertained. So we do have to, recognize that some of these changes will change status quo in the industry, and we don't know at this stage if we can actually reach an accord. There is a plan here. What we're doing is, up until really the turn of the end of this month, beginning of June, we're asking people to go to our website. We'll give you the link on the next slide in a second, but to go and contribute your wildest ideas, to tell us where you think there would be good techniques or technologies or strategies that we can go and explore as a group. At the EU Parliament next month, we're gathering as many members as we can, both in real world and online. We've invited various regulatory groups to be there as well, because they don't really know what we're doing as an industry. We'll want them to see what we're doing and maybe partake in something of a hackathon, where we're going to design some tests to try out some of these ideas across our members' infrastructures and workflows in real world production. A lot of the work that's been done in labs doesn't translate to the real world, and we want to do this stuff in as close to a real world production model as we possibly can. Over the summer, we're going to get some prototypes stood up, present those back to the industry at IBC in the autumn for a last kicking before in Q4 and Q1 we run those tests at some scale, get the data into our working group 9, which is a collection of academics that we liaise with, so they can mark our homework, and we can avoid greenwashing ourselves, and they can tell us how the efforts that we've made actually translate into benefits to the climate, benefits to sustainability, as much as we'll already see from benefits to the economics from our own models and so on. And then once we've got some sort of short list of what those strategies look like, we're going to gather again in Burbank in Q2 next year, and have something of an end of project pseudo awards ceremony, a bit of fun to basically make sure the press, the policymakers in America and in the industry at large can really understand what the industry can do, is doing, and might even sort of adopt these strategies going forward across the industry. So that's the LESS Accord. It is doubtless ambitious. It's great fun that we've got such a lot of support from our members, and the LESS Accord contributions are coming in now, so we're getting good contribution from the industry. If you'd like to throw some crazy ideas at us, please point your camera phone at the QR code, or just go to greeningandstreaming.org/less and fill in the form, throw some ideas at us, contribute stuff, and I and all the members will look at those at the beginning of June and turn those into, hopefully, some real world working projects. There we go. Hopefully I've rattled through that in about 10 minutes and left plenty of time for discussion.
Yes, that was really quick and efficient. Before I hand over to Kristen and to respond, I was really disappointed, Dom, in one aspect of your presentation.
Go for it.
There's no gossip. Because often when you talk about greenwashing, you give us some nice crispy examples. When you say greenwashing, there must be a story or two you can ask. What does greenwashing in our industry actually look like that you witnessed?
So I'm going to go straight to the jugular on my favorite hot topic, which is we are an industry which has monetized itself through data transfer. So our accounting systems, our modeling through our environment, all essentially track gigabits or gigabytes and translate those up or downstream into economic models. And that's been the low-hanging fruit for the industry to jump on as a way to try to account also for its sustainability. And through that, to cut a long story short, there is a widespread understanding, or a widespread urban myth, that that is now actively being promoted by the Big Four accountancy firms that 1 gigabyte equals 1 kilogram of carbon. It makes me white-knuckled with fury, that particular bit of greenwashing, because there is no evidence of that. It has come out of a modeling called data attribution, which tried to create a circular economy feedback to the industry that to say feel responsible for the internet. And it's left us all thinking that if we don't send emails, if we don't use network services, we're somehow saving energy. And there is really, in the networks in particular, and yes, there is some variability in the CPE and then the encoding at the source of the content, but in the networks, there is almost no evidence at all that not using a network saves any energy. That sounds counterintuitive when everybody thinks, oh, well, if I don't send an email, that's saved a tree. It doesn't work like that. The networks are on, they're provisioned on all the time, whether you're sending all zeros or a mixture of zeros and ones. That particular piece of carbon accounting is now pervasive. The ad industry's adopted it. All sorts of digital media groups are trying to promote this idea that reducing your data transfer is green. And nobody spoke to the CDNs and the networks and asked them, and it just doesn't work. If you don't send data over your broadband link, nothing changes. You're still using energy. There is perhaps 2 to 3% variability in the last mile layer 2 device on radio networks, which is a very small fraction. So yeah, that's my particular bugbear, and that's one of the most common greenwashing activities, which is pervasive, often with noble intent. It's because of a lack of understanding. That in particular is one that I feel very strongly about, and it's something that we as an industry need to really understand before we promote it any further.
Yeah, it's a parallel to what I said in the opening with the Wi-Fi. You know, if you try and save carbon by not using your Wi-Fi, you're wasting your time. You have to actually turn it off to make any difference.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have loads more questions for you, but I don't want to occupy the limelight. I want to get Kristen, if you want to fire your camera up, and take the floor and try and respond to this idea. So that the Less Accord is about trying to lower some aspects of video quality so that, you know, we can save in the resources. And if you could talk to us about what that video quality actually means, how you measure it, and start by just giving us a little intro to where you come from, Kristen, and how you got where you are in sustainability. Over to you.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Dom. It's always very intense following on from Dom, so I just need a few moments to normalize my emotions before I dive into things. My name's Kristen Bullitt. I'm founder and CEO of Humans Not Robots. We're a product company responsible for providing media-focused analytics and advisories. We specifically zoom in on the sustainability aspect of media operations. Ultimately, our mission is to make video cleaner, cheaper, and faster. I've got 20 plus years working in and around media organizations, spent a lot of time building OTT platforms for people like Sky and Liberty Global, spent a huge amount of time working in the back office in large media organizations, watching how they respectfully and always mindful of efficiencies within their operations, and very often focused on moving features forwards rather than reducing some of their costs. So it's always a very interesting conversation when we talk about how we do things more modestly or we try and do things more efficiently, because if we look on the business side of the house, we're looking at how do we improve ARPU, how do we improve our overall customer base, how do we make more money out of all of this, and this goes effectively in the face of that. Having said that, you use less of something, it costs you less. So there are definitely tangible commercial benefits to this as well. As I said, listening to Dom, there's a lot to take in there. And I think the Less Accord's a really bold move because the industry continues to focus on carbon and carbon footprint. And I think that's a significant challenge for this initiative. So people like D'impact and Albert, and of course the Carbon Trust, are very much focused on key data points such as carbon footprint per streaming user. And as much as it's a difficult data point to measure and understand. I think as consumers, we're starting to understand what the carbon footprint is. And I challenge whether going and looking at power consumption is going to be a significant knowledge leap. First of all, within the industry, but also outside of the industry and looking at direct consumers. I love all of the data points that have been presented, and I know that expresses how significant things are. We then have various industry-wide video quality metrics, but these are all focused on the technical merits of video. And how do we do the qualitative versus quantitative aspects of understanding what is acceptable? It's interesting that you mention, a lot of time spent with the television on. We're often dealing with the kids or in the kitchen and not actually looking at the screen. But I certainly don't see a situation where we're going to start using the camera on top of the TV to understand that and start to provide the right output of video based on who that TV knows is consuming that data at that point in time. Capturing and understanding data is vital for anything that we're doing. And I think as an industry, we've always struggled with that because we're hungry for more features and advancements in technology. And certainly from the technical side of the house, we like to do cool and interesting things. And 4K, 8K, UHD, HDR, I think you're absolutely right. How much do people genuinely care about that versus I'm a consumer and that's what I'm being told that I want? So instead of racing forward with features, taking a step back and really getting a good handle on that data measuring and understanding is vital if we're going to actually make an effect on how consumers are consuming video. But obviously capturing data is a very challenging thing to do. And across the whole supply chain, there's so many data points that need to be captured. I think there's a real risk that we'll start to get some data points, but it will be very difficult to articulate how we can achieve savings from those data points unless you're covering everything. And if you're covering everything within the supply chain, then that's a huge challenge. That's a huge project in itself. And there's then a real risk that people are going to have their view fogged by CPE equipment or head-end aspects. And ultimately, across all of that, I'd like to understand, how significant this problem is. And I absolutely appreciate that the Lesser Code is about understanding that. I suppose another question is, are we actually asking the consumers what they want? Maybe another approach would be to tell the consumers what they want instead of letting them understand that moving towards 8K and larger screens and blacker blacks and all those good things is what they actually want. Is there a way to incentivize the user to sacrifice the quality of video that they're watching? Maybe a benevolent dictator approach is something that might be of value here. And then I think for me, the final thing is looking at the technical prioritization. Dom, you mentioned meeting in Burbank, bringing the golden eyes together to try and understand the shift in the difference between the lesser core produced content versus more traditional golden eye produced content. Having smart people in rooms with very, very high quality screens, really scrutinizing bits and pixels on the screen, that doesn't really have a true reflection on how we consume that content at home. And again, I challenge what does the consumer actually want here? And I think maybe finally, that comes back to product management decisioning around features versus customer-led features. And maybe a good consideration needs to be taken there, again, to step back and say, are we chasing features for commercial competitiveness, or can we more truly reflect on people just want to watch content? So let's give them the content and focus a little bit less on trying to force higher and higher end technical considerations onto them. I think that's some of my thoughts, Ben.
Well, thank you very much. Benevolent dictator. I love that in our industry. But just before handing over to Vincent, this idea to bounce back on the gold button versus green button versus should we ask people. I had an interesting observation writing that white paper I discussed about. It was a Wi-Fi space, but very much the same kind of topic. And I must have interviewed a few dozen people, and there was 100% effect that all the techies in the industry, they all said we had to do it under the hood, which is more like the gold button approach. So Dom responds to that. I'm not sure where you, and all the marketing people said, no, we have to get the users involved. We have to ask them, we have to tell them, we have to, it was an interesting separation between the way, but let's perhaps come back to that in the round table. And I'll have some more questions for you then. Vincent, you want to give a response in about 10 minutes or so? If you can stay within 10 minutes, that would be great. So we'll have time to have a debate with Kristen and Dom afterwards.
Well, let me take that challenge on then. And you'll warn me if I exceed the 10 minutes. Let me just do the button push, whether it's green or gold, to share my presentation. My topic for today, because we are talking about green streaming, is to share with you maybe a little bit of an unexpected and provocative thought on whether we can make streaming greener by using a push and cache over legacy terrestrial broadcast infrastructure. And I am doing that with like two hats on my head. One is my kind of day-to-day occupation, where I have my own small consulting company called BMV Consulting. And I have been running over the last 3 years a collaborative project known under the name of the LOCAT project, LOCAT standing for the Low Carbon TV Delivery Project. Project was backed by a number of European broadcasting network operators and broadcasting channels. The central question, which, sorry, I was pressing the wrong button. The LOCAT question on which we worked during mostly 21-22 was a very simple but important one. How green is the delivery of TV content across Europe? And in this question, TV was streaming and classical linear TV, so it was not limited to streaming. And TV in this context, in the context of the LOCAT study, was very much limited to watching TV on the TV screen. This is far from being complete, because we all know there are many other screens on which people watch TV, but you need to start somewhere. And what has been the main finding from the LOCAT project? The main finding is really here, is that not all TV delivery platforms are born equal. If you look on the left side, you can see how much energy 1 hour of TV is using depending on the platform. And the light blue 14 watt hours per hour of viewing is the DTT, European average. 109, the pink bar, is OTT, which is mainly streaming. OTT, it maybe changes a little bit now with the fast channel, but a few years ago, OTT was mainly streaming. And on the right side, the kind of dark blue-green 153 watt hours is IPTV, managed IPTV. If you translate that in grams of CO2 on the left side, because people like to think of sustainability in terms of CO2, you can see the numbers, but now I will focus on the energy figures, because we know that energy, electricity, is a scarce resource, and that is what needs to be conserved. By the way, also, I will not speak further that in my presentation. Obviously, whatever gain you can achieve in electricity, you will have a matching gain in CO2, and you will have a matching gain in euros. If things are expensive, it's because they use a lot of electricity. If things become energy efficient, they cost much less. So almost 1-for-1, you can adapt all results in euros and CO2. And I will now focus on electricity watt hours. If you look at that in terms of absolute numbers across Europe, you can, the big numbers that you may want to remember is that in EU 28, so we mentally reintegrate UK in the European Union, you have European citizens watch about 300 billion hours of TV on their TV screen a year. About half of that, the green part, is watched or delivered through DTT. 95 billion hours, so like a third, is OTT, streaming. And like a quarter of that, 53 billion hours, is IPTV. IPTV here means the managed IPTV, which does not happen in all European countries. That is why it's relatively small. If you think of it in terms of electricity, if you look at the bottom bar, DTT will use only 10% of the required electricity. OTT will use 50% for 32% of viewed hours. And IPTV will use even more, 40%, for only 18% of the watch hour. Interestingly, the total of electricity that is consumed to deliver television, the TV screen is not included here, electricity to deliver TV content to your TV screen amounts to 21,000 gigawatt hours in Europe. Is that a big number or not? Yes, it is a big number. In average, one nuclear reactor delivers a little under 7,000 gigawatt hours a year, which means that you can remember that in Europe, 3 nuclear reactors are dedicated to deliver TV content on TV screens. And if you want to think of it in terms of environment, we all know that the most dirty electricity production is made by coal, and the country, at least for now, where the biggest usage of coal is made is Germany. And Germany is producing 50,000 gigawatt hours of electricity on a yearly basis out of coal. So basically, you could say that half of the coal which is burnt in Germany to produce electricity is burnt to power or to bring images to TV sets in Europe. So we're talking big numbers and a big impact. That's the problem, or that's the starting point. I will not really comment that slide, but just to make a verbal comment, not commenting the numbers, to just outline that this usage of electricity is coming actually in each platform, the columns, from 3 main areas. The first line is the big distance, that's the networks, the big kilometers. The second line, and that echoes what you said, Benjamin, about the Wi-Fi, actually that in home being wasted energy. The second line is in-home network equipment, including the Wi-Fi things, and that is a lot. And the third line are the viewing peripherals, so the kind of devices that exist in between the IP network and the TV set, and that is not negligible either. The distribution exists in similar terms almost in all 3 platforms. Now let us focus on streaming hours. So we will remove now the legacy linear TV hours. In EU 28, again, you can assume that roughly speaking, European citizens watch 100 billion hours of streaming a year on their TV set. Actually, that is a 2021 number, and that probably goes up by 20% every year. This generates or uses 11,000 gigawatt hours of electricity. And you can see again the comparison. So basically 2 nuclear reactors are used just to power streaming in Europe. And that generates close to 3 million tons of CO2. That is the streaming, the environment impact of streaming in Europe. Could you reduce that? Yes. And you can reduce it with a very simple concept, which we call here the home caching concept. What is this concept? The concept is based on a very simple observation that when people watch streaming, most of the time watch the same thing, and that is the so-called fat tail, which is the blue arrow on the top of the drawing. And I had the chance or the opportunity, the luck, to be able to look at real streaming platforms numbers. And in any average VOD platform, which has maybe a catalog of 20,000 hours, on any given day, any given week, 50% of usage is made with just about 10 to 20 catalog hours. And it's only very tempting when you have isolated these fat tail catalog hours that you're going to broadcast them as if they were live content, like the royal coronation over last weekend. And you will broadcast them over DTT. And instead of expecting that everybody will watch them live just at the moment they come to the home, you're going to store them in a very small, low energy home cache unit. And then any home application, any home streaming application will access these images whenever it's the good moment for the person watching them. And you're going to apply that scheme only to the fat tail, and the long tail, you will just leave it on the IP and the CDN infra. And if you do that, look at study projected, if you look at the scenario D, which is the home caching at the bottom of the curve, that you could reduce by at least 10% the amount of energy used by the TV delivery across Europe. And remember, this is on the basis, this is 10% of the total basis, including the linear TV viewing. So if you focus on just the streaming, this is going to be a much higher reduction. And actually focusing again on the impact per hour, on the left side, again, you see the main result of the LOCAT study, how many watt hours are used per hour of TV watching. On the right side, let us focus on streaming. In average, if it's IP streaming, one IP streaming hour is using 115 watt hours. One push and cache hour is using only 7.5 watt hours. Large part of it is made of the small energy usage of the cache unit in the home. But you can see that there is a big difference, and you cannot achieve that gain on every streaming hour because that applies only to the fat tail. But if you think that maybe on half or even 30% of the streaming usage, you could divide the unit impact by 12, the overall gain is very significant. Some conclusions of my 10 minutes, Ben, hoping I have not exceeded them. And I think everybody here, especially my fellow speakers speaking before me, agreed that watching TV and especially streaming has a very significant energy and carbon cost. This cost becomes a very significant social, political, and business issue. The issue is only growing because streaming is growing. So the issue is growing. Of course, you could reduce the issue by reducing the amount of streaming hours. I'm not sure people would like that. You can try to reduce the problem by sending less gigabytes, less pixel, and maybe there are many other good ideas. But the idea which I would like to promote here is that certainly you could reduce significantly the environmental impact of streaming with absolutely no end user impact just by delivering the streaming hours through an intrinsically green delivery platform, which is the broadcast DTT platform, which, by the way, has the good flavor or the good feature of being absolutely existent. There is no infrastructure to deliver, to build, or to upgrade. So this is my 5 cents contribution to the greening of streaming, and I'm very happy to take questions and challenges on that.
Thank you, Vincent. Just a quick clarification. The figures, the gigawatt figures you gave, like 11,000 gigawatts, they do not include the power consumption of the TV set itself, right?
Correct. And actually, I would not be able to mention from the top of my head the figure with the TV set, but it's very big. If you use DTT, the integration of the TV set is going to multiply your total cost by 4 or 5 because TV is much bigger than the network. If you use OTT or IPTV, it is a non-marginal 20-30% addition. Average TV set, I think, is like 53 watts of power.
If Dom and Kristen, if you want to turn your cameras on, yeah, it kind of irks me that all a big study like LOCAT wouldn't, but I don't know anybody who has really embraced those 53 watts that are in billions of homes and said, okay, I'm counting them. They may not be on my scope 3, let's call it scope 4 or something, but nobody's actually taking responsibility for those, whether they be operators, TV makers. It's just done to individual consumers as far as I'm aware. Does anybody know of a major organization that's really embracing the issue of the TV screen?
Well, if I may, Ben, I think it's not entirely fair to say that the TV manufacturers do not take responsibility for that. I think it's fair to say that they acknowledge that a TV set is using a significant amount of energy, and they are making significant efforts to reduce that. The first effort being to make sure that the TV is off when people do not watch it. That seems absolutely stupid, but it's not that stupid because many TV sets remain on all the time.
Just by the way, could you just stop sharing your screen?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was still sharing.
No,
here we are.
No problem. Then we can see our faces in glorious SD, or whatever it is. So this is a good example, Dom, in terms of the good enough quality. These videos are captured in 720. I then go put them through Adobe Premiere and do some editing to put them on the YouTube channel. Is 720 good enough for today in terms of resolution? Let's just dive in there.
Oh, more than good enough. I mean, we internally in my company, we don't use video. It reduces productivity because you're grinning at a screen all the time instead of doing 3 things at the same time while concentrating. So if you're good at multitasking, having a video on since the pandemic and everyone turned the cameras on has actually reduced my productivity because I now sit looking at a screen, being polite to the people I'm listening to, looking attentive. Where Janet and all the other people who are in this event at the moment, I doubt there'll be many of the people tuned in today who are just sitting staring at the screen because their cameras aren't on. But the moment we put the cameras on, they'll all be locked into the screen and their productivity elsewhere will go down. So in a workplace environment, I actually think video is unnecessary. Sometimes it's helpful, but yeah, quality wise, you're talking to someone who was happy to see moving pixels on a 56K line in '96 when he started streaming. I'm always amazed that the pixels keep moving. I'm not a golden eyes at all. I'm not really interested in VQ as a career. I'm interested in transmission. So you're asking the wrong person.
Yeah, I remember I tried to entertain a debate with you last time about artistic intent and failed miserably. So I'm going to try Kristen.
So I disagree with Dom completely on that. Obviously this is a webinar. It's our job to make the content engaging so people aren't going to be picking up their phone and playing on their emails while we're talking. But actually, a higher quality video helps to make that more engaging, in my opinion. And I'm not being funny, but I like to see what's going on in the background in people's houses, and I get a little bit of invite into your lives by doing that. And if we were on grainy black and white videos, it would be far less engaging. So it's very important. And that's from a business perspective. When it comes to home entertainment, I'm assuming, Dom, you've not got an old Sony Triniton that you watch movies in black and white on with the family on an evening.
No.
And the easy get out isn't to say you don't watch films, right?
No. I've got a giant 70-inch TCL screen. I love. Don't watch a lot of content, interesting content on it. I tend to watch quantum mechanics lectures, if I'm honest, but off YouTube. But hey, the family tend to kick me off it and then watch whatever they watch on Netflix.
So back to my point, because you were kind of saying in your response to Dom, Kristen, that 8K, 4K, you kind of adopted his line, who really cares?
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to ask you about artistic intent. I mean, you're wearing a techie hat like all of us around this, we're part of finding this technical solution, but the reason for being a video is to convey emotions, human emotions, and they're artists that create the videos to do that, and they have a canvas with which to do it. And you were kind of saying, 4K, 8K, all that is all the same. Are you sure because you're a video quality specialist, so when you actually understand, there's a double question. If you can talk about artistic intent and talk about how a robot or computer understands quality versus a human eye and brain, and whether art can have anything to do with the difference there.
Yeah, and if you look at things like live sports, it's an obvious example of your eye is following the activity, and therefore ancillary content around that, it's acceptable for that to be encoded at a lower quality because we're not even looking at that part of the screen. And there's plenty of studies being done to show that is the case, and that's really interesting. But from a GoldenEye perspective, they aren't always doing that. They're looking at the entire screen and all of the quality around that. So technically, there's this drive to continue to maintain high quality across the entirety of the picture. But from a consumer and psychological side of things, actually the eye doesn't care that much. So how do you effectively measure what consumers at home care about? Yes, I made a comment about 8K. Do consumers even want that? Unfortunately, when watching nature programming, you then start to scrutinize that. So as much as I think consumers don't care, I think there are use cases where they do care. But how do you differentiate between that? And that's a psychology point, or it's not as easy as saying sports, we can sacrifice the level of quality. Nature, we have to have very, very high quality. But there's a way to measure some of these things. And I'm not convinced we're always focusing on that.
Okay. And Vincent, you have any input on the quality debate? Whether there is any intrinsic value in video of high quality?
I would generally think yes, even in a video conference like this one. I must confess that I would even be happy if I could see in some kind of quality the faces of the people listening and not only the speakers. So I think in a kind of business communication like this session, video is important. Probably we don't need 8K. And as you said, the 720 we have is probably sufficient, but I'm happy having the images. And if you think now of entertainment images, I must confess that personally, I'm super happy with HD. UHD, I'm happy as well, but probably I'm not pissed off if I do not have UHD. And anytime I was lucky to attend an 8K demo, I saw these were artificial images. So I'm not sure about the relevance of 8K.
Okay, that's a subjective point of view, but
totally subjective.
But just before
and maybe to have a little bit more serious insight or positive insight, to me, I think if I were expecting an improvement of the media quality which I'm consuming for entertainment purposes, I would rather expect improvements on the sound rather than an image. In my humble view, but maybe it's very personal because I'm a sound lover, I find that the sound has a super important impact on my experience and immersion.
Does that have any impact on the network, Dom? sound?
No, not particularly. I think it's a small proportion of the bandwidth. If bandwidth is a key factor here, you know, and that's up in the air. But I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that you know, so my software company delivers about 75% of the world's financial news, and it's absolutely imperative that the audio gets through. The video is incidental in that particular context. When you're doing a quarterly announcement, we have ISDN line dial-in still going on into the system, because if the broadband, the internet connection wigs out, we still want to get that audio feed, and that's imperative in that particular use case. So I wholeheartedly agree with Vincent that in many use cases, the mind will sort of blur through broken up, stuttery, pixelated video. But if you start getting buffers and jitter in your audio feed, it just becomes unwatchable and people will switch off, and it becomes meaningless. So yeah, I think audio is much more imperative than people seem to think.
Guys, we've got some really interesting comments and questions already all lined up. There's only 1 minute left in this session, so we're not going to take them now. We're going to take them in the second hour. So we're going to cut off. Now we have to move to another room. Normally, when you close this, you'll have a little link just below that says join the next session. If not, you just go back to the previous tab, or worst case, hit the link you originally hit to come here, and you should see the second hour. So this is the next session is open mic. I've recorded all the questions, so we're going to go into the questions. I'd like to thank you, Dom, Kristen, and Vincent, and also Janet, of course.